welcome. Brochim Habayim. Blessed are those who come to our B'nai Noach Connection with Israel meeting, Torah for the Nations. This is Pesach Sherbo coming to you live at 3:03 in the morning our time in Israel. We're so glad that you guys have tuned in. I'm here with Terry Hayes, my co-host, and during this upcoming holiday season, there may be a meeting or two he's going to be running because I'll be busy doing what God has asked us to do, the Jews, and be praying in his house of prayer for many different things. We'll discuss that. In the meantime, Chrissy from Australia, thanks for being here. Angela from Canada, thank you for being here. Scotty, Veronica, I don't remember, Veronica, you still from Canada, or forget where you're from. And Jerry, welcome, first time around, I guess. I don't remember the name from before. That doesn't mean much, because when you get my age, your memory gets like a goldfish, about 3 seconds worth. But welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming. And if you have your chat room open, you can put questions in there. We monitor it, or you can kind of like raise your hand. At other times, when other people are speaking, I appreciate if you keep your mic on mute, just so inadvertent sounds don't come in. And anyway, it's good to see everybody. Terry, want to welcome people?
I just want to welcome Jerry. Where are you from?
From Lombard, Illinois.
Illinois. Okay.
Welcome, and Illinois.
Veronica is Washington State, I believe. Right, Veronica?
Oh, okay.
Correct.
Okay, good to see everybody, and all those of you that are watching around the world, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and see the videos as they come up if you can't meet with us at meeting time. If you have questions that come up as you're viewing and not here live, but otherwise, best is to send a message to B'nai Noach Connection with Israel. If you put a comment on the YouTube, sometimes it goes by a few days or so before anybody even sees the comments up there. So the best thing to do, or you can message Terry or myself, either one of us, or go to B'nai Noach Connection with Israel on Facebook and message through there. Now, as we always have a pre-meeting meeting where we just come and chit-chat and talk. And one of the questions came up that Chrissy got a phone call from a lady who was really just kind of disturbed about. She went to some Noahide places and they were talking negatively, where they were talking negatively about certain things, and they were talking negatively about certain teachers and so forth. And that happens a lot. There are Noahide groups out there that actually won't let me join as an Israelite. They don't want to hear from me. They want to decide everything on their own, which is simply the way Christianity did things. So they're still in their, let me put their Edom thinking, and we're going to talk about that. When you join in and you become a part of Israel, and how do you do that? Becoming what we call a righteous person of the nations, or we call it today Noahide, because that's what the prevailing thing is. You become part of Israel. And one of the things that we don't do, and if a teacher is doing it, even if he's part of Israel, understand, even if he's part of Israel, if his thing is to tell you how somebody's teaching poorly, or what somebody says is not right, or something like that, they are in error. No matter what the other person said, the person that says that is in error. It does two things. First of all, it gives legitimacy to whatever that person is saying. You start a dialogue. If somebody says something, you disagree with it, then you're giving legitimacy to what they're doing. One of our basic tenets as Jews is we do not put down the rabbis, we don't put down the sages, we don't put down other teachers. We simply teach. We're positive about things. We don't teach from a negative standpoint. We teach from how to make your relationship better with the Creator, with God, and not how to make it worse, or what if you do this, it's worse, and if you do that, it's worse. If those of you that get to know who we are at Torah for the Nations and B'nai Noach connection with Israel, you'll find that we always present things in a positive manner, not a negative manner. We're always recruiting people. We're trying to we're trying to recruit not only Jewish people, but also what I call righteous of the nations people to come in and join us, because the righteous of the nations have their part in the world to come. They're covered by the God of Israel. He gladly folds his glorious wings around them and protects them and brings them up to the next level of life. We concern ourselves with our relationship with the Creator and how we live this life, because if we do it the way he wants, then we don't have to worry about where we're going to be when our body dies. We're going to the next level of life. We don't die with our body. So it's an important thing to remember. This should always be presented in the positive. And Chrissy mentioned that she heard some of this stuff and it just felt funny when she heard it. Well, good. When that happens and it feels funny to you, it's not a mental funny, it's a spiritual funny. And I don't mean funny, ha-ha. It just sounded weird or something. That means you are going in the right direction. You're climbing that ladder. You're becoming that righteous Gentile, that they're righteous of the nations that God wants. Understand something. Righteous of the nations is not a final destination. It is what you do when you put your foot on the first step or the first rung of the ladder to completely, both spiritually and physically, decide you're hooked up with the God of Israel. It's your choice. He doesn't look at you and say, well, I don't want you because you did this before. He doesn't do that. The minute you put your foot on the first step, you're righteous. There's, of course, levels to it, but that doesn't make any difference. As long as you're on the first step, you're equal to the guy that's been climbing the ladder for 50 years of his life. And if tomorrow or 30 seconds from now, the Messiah comes and we start the Messianic era, you're done, you're in. It's not how much you know, it's the direction you're walking. God wants from us, he wants from us progress, not perfection. It depends on where we're looking, how we're connecting with him. Not with other individuals, by the way, although we like to connect in groups. I mean, that's just who we are. But it's your responsibility to hook up with him, but not to hook up just the way you think you should. That's the way that other religions do it. Israel has a very definite way to connect with the God of Israel. The Jews have one way, the righteous of the nations have another way, and they're all Israelites. You all have a part of Israel. God created each one of us with a very specific need that he has, a need to finish a cycle of creation. He didn't complete creation because if he had completed it, we'd all be little angels and flapping wings, or we'd all be little robots and cult people. But he said, no, I want each individual to be a thinking person. I want each individual to choose. I want everybody to be a distinct individual, because that's what makes my creation so wonderful. It's not just like looking at a herd of cows in a field and they're all doing the same thing. He created us to be individuals, to be the reason he created us. He may have created someone to be first chair violinist in an orchestra. He may have created someone else to be a conductor of the orchestra. Now that's physical, but if you put it in the spiritual, the whole orchestra works together to attain one goal. But each person sitting there is an individual. When they come together, they've come from their homes, whatever's happened at home, they have kids, they don't have kids, they're married, they're not married. Doesn't make any difference. Once we come together under the banner of Israel, God looks and says, there's my beloved Israelites. And with Israel, God has a covenant. A covenant is something you pass through. It's not a written document. And so, okay, here's the covenant, sign here. It doesn't mean anything. The covenant is a doorway that God gives us to pass through it to come to the other side, to his side, to be part of Israel. And we're not supposed to look at other people and see how bad they're doing. We're not supposed to knock other teachers to see what they're teaching. We're just supposed to learn how to think with the head of an Israelite and not an Edomite. Terry brought up a question, or I wasn't going to start with this, it just rolls right into it. but let's see. Many may have given up the deity like the Edomites, but they still drag Edom into everything they do. And that is true.
But how do you leave Edom?
How do you get out of Edom? You can get out of it physically, but how do you get out of it mentally? And before the program, I was talking about the Exodus from Egypt, and it gets a little complicated. But when it comes around Pesach time, maybe I'll do a whole longer teaching on it. But simply, the time it took to leave Egypt and get to Mount Sinai was 49 days. There are 50 levels to be perfect, to purify yourself. Israel had to go each day and each day and each day another level of purification until they came in front of Mount Sinai, and God told Moses, go tell Israel, wash your clothes, purify yourselves, take a bath, get cleaned up. And he says, and then bring Israel, and it's in singular, to stand before me. Each one of us has that job to do for ourselves. It's a way of thinking. If you take the way of thinking that you've been taught in the Roman Greek way, which is Western way of thinking, then you can't get to attain any heights. You're always going to fall flat. The hardest thing is to open up your head, the mental part, which that's why God gave us brains, and say, well, wait a minute. This way of thinking brings me back to this Edom thing. But if I change my way of thinking and allow myself to gain knowledge from the Israel side, the spiritual side, then I'm going to make my steps closer with God. And that's what the Jews have been trying to do since we became known as Israelites. And in some ways we've succeeded, in some ways we've totally failed. But it's a process of learning. It's a process of learning. Hello, Lee Patton. Patton, yeah. It's a process of learning. And there are Noahide groups out there, not only that will not allow an Israelite to be part of them, they're teaching their own doctrines. They're interpreting things the way they want to interpret. Now, having said that, we also have rabbis that are teaching very strict and very harsh ways. You can tell by the teaching, but it's generally harsh words, harsh things. Your spirit will tell you what it is, that whether it's right or not. Now, what the biggest thing I know how to tell you is, if someone's up there preaching like they're giving a sermon, you're going to go to hell, and all the bad stuff, then that's part of what shouldn't be taught. I'm watching the history of the Ottoman Empire. And of course, those were, that's Ishmael, that's Muslims. But I noticed something as I'm watching it, that even though they believe in one God, even though they believe, they don't believe in any idols or anything, the God they believe in is a very strong, a hard God, do it this way or I kill you. Do it that way or I'll kill you. Do it this way or I'll kill you. You have no choice. You say, I am God and there is no other, or we kill you. God tells the Israelites, not by strength, not by might. Israel has always been kept a very small portion of the world population, about 0.2%. Why? He doesn't want us to get tempted by doing things by conquest. The only time he's ever told us to cleanse a land was the land that he had originally given to the 7 Canaanite tribes who did not follow any of his instructions. And he said, okay, Israel, this is your new home. Go in there. I'm going to drive them out before you. Unfortunately, we had to do some fighting in there too, but we got tired of it after 14 years of battle. And that's why we still have people here who are not Israelites in the spiritual sense, still living in the land today, 3,000 years later, 3,200 years later. He built us to be an example to people how you accomplish things without using all the negative, without using power and might. Nothing depends, and to quote from the Psalms, on the thighs of man or on the hooves of horses. It has to do with working with people and teaching them in a way that they will recognize who God is. And I think it's Isaiah 9 something, I forget it, where God says, one day the whole earth is going to be filled with knowledge for me like the waters cover the earth. Everybody's going to know who he is. And if that time somebody doesn't say, yes, okay, I recognize you, then they've got a big problem. There's still people today that think that way. And they you know, before the flood, people actually believed in only one God. But it was the way they treated each other that was the problem. After the flood, they believed in the one God and they started being nice to each other. But then they decided, well, wait a minute, God created us and kind of left us alone because he's not directing anything. In the physical, he wasn't. And so he's left us alone. So maybe we have to talk to the moon or the sun or the stars to get what we want. They recognize the moon, sun, and stars as emissaries of God. But I can't get to God, I can't get to the king, so I'm going to talk to one of the ministers. So maybe I can get what I want. And they started to believe it. And then individuals start, well, I got to cover my house with safety. So there's a house God, and there's a field God, and there's a water God, and and so they started addressing those things, and then they started making graven images to them, and that's when real idolatry started in the world. So as each of us do our journey, even a Jew, we learn how to think. So many of us are raised in the Western way of thinking all across Europe and the USA, that we get locked into this particular way of thinking, which keeps us stuck in the Edom side, even a Jew, in their way of thinking. For those of you that don't know my history, I was 70 years old when I came to be a frum Jew. In other words, following the rules that God wants a Jew to follow. My whole life was, yes, I believe in God, only one God, and I trust in God. And I had my bar mitzvah, and we had our Friday night. We never did what we call Shomer Shabbat. In other words, we drove on Shabbat, we turned on lights on Shabbat, we cooked on Shabbat, but we knew it was a Shabbat. And we'd have Friday night dinners at home where the whole family was together and a whole bunch of Jewish friends would come over, and we'd have a big meal together. And after the meal, we'd sing psalms and just have a grand old time. But it took me a whole lot of years to get rid of my Western way of thinking that, wait a minute, everything that God has put here and everything that he has given us in oral Torah, and he's given us through the years, through the judges, to make decisions. This is what we have to do because this is what he wants from us. Not wants, he needs it from us. It's nice to say he wants it, but he needs it so we can complete the cycle of creation, the cycle of creation. Creation isn't complete yet. God's waiting for you to realize he needs you to do these things for him. And that's what completes creation. It doesn't make you the perfect person. I'm far from perfect, but I still do the best I can to follow what he says to do. And let's see. In this week's Torah portion, it's very interesting. The opening verse is called Nitzavim, or standing. It says, you are all standing this day before the Lord your God, the leaders of your tribes, your elders, your officers, every man of Israel, your young children, your women, your convert who is within your camp, both your woodcutters and your water drawers, that you may enter the covenant of the Lord your God and his oath, which the Lord your God is making this day. Nitzavim, to stand in front of God. Now today we read it, and we've read what we have to do to be considered in that group of standing before God. Back then, they were just starting the journey. Here we're 2,000 or 3,000 years into the journey. And those of us that are still standing before God, even with our mistakes and everything else, is the proof that he has made the covenant and he hasn't been, okay, you stepped out of line, I'm going to hit you with lightning or something like that. You know, most people do or don't know this, but I'm going to repeat it. You know, there was an altar in the temple where they threw the meat on to be totally burned or partially burned or cooked, depending on what it was. And it talks about we have to keep the fire going on the altar 24/7. But the fire on the altar, it wasn't on, it was like under the altar that we kept the fire burning. Because the fire that that consumed the offerings was from heaven. When we put the sacrifice something on the altar, the fire from God came down and burned it. Our fire didn't. Because I can always throw something on a fire and say, it's a sacrifice to God, look how great I am. But either the fire came down and consumed your sacrifice or it didn't, from God, which is a sign of acceptance or non-acceptance in many times. And we see it with Eliyahu, when he went in front of the priests of Baal in Ahab's time, where he built a big altar and so forth. I mean, to me, that's just such a fascinating story, because there's contradictions in it, like he shouldn't have built an altar there and things like that, but why God allowed him to do it. In order to establish you this day as his people, that he will be your God, as he spoke to you and as he swore to your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But not only with you am I making this covenant and this oath, but those standing here with us today before the Lord our God, and also with those who are not here today. That doesn't mean those who have died already. That means all of the generations to come is being spoken out. When Moses was standing there speaking this, he was talking to me and to you. It wasn't to every individual that will ever be born, he was speaking. He was speaking into the future. That's why he was the greatest prophet of all times. For you now, you know how we dwelled in the land of Egypt, or we can replace it with Edom, and how we passed among the nations through which you passed, and you saw the abominations, their repugnant idols of wood and stone, silver and gold. Then he says something very, very interesting. Perhaps there is among you a man, woman, family, or tribe whose heart strays this day from the Lord our God, and to go and worship with those deities. Perhaps there's among you a root that produces hemlock and wormwood. verse 18 is really, really, in chapter 29, is really, it will be, when such a person hears the words of this oath, that he will bless himself in his heart, saying, I will have peace, even if I follow my own heart's desires, in order to add the punishment for unintentional sins to that of intentional sins. In other words, someone says, this is what's in my heart. This is what I really feel. This is what I got to do. Instead of listening to what God says to do, he goes into what he wants to do. And God says, those people are not good. The Lord will not be willing to forgive him. Rather, the Lord's fury and zeal will fume against that man. The entire curse written in the book will be set upon him. In a later generation, your descendants who arise after you, along with the foreigner who comes from distant land, will say, what happened here to Israel? And that's what people have been saying, because we did some of that stuff. The point is that the Lord wants us to walk in his word, not in what our heart, and when most people don't realize that what the heart produces is from the fleshly side, not the spiritual side. It's the emotional side, the fleshly side, the animal side. Just like when somebody likes cherry pie, and I love cherry pie, you can say. But is that from a spiritual side? Of course not. You put it in your mouth, you'll love the taste, and it's flesh, and it's gone in a heartbeat. And then you're thinking about, when am I going to get my next piece of cherry pie? Or ice cream, or whatever it is, whatever it happens to be. So that's from the fleshly side. From the spiritual side, if you really love something, like, boy, I love my cinnamon donuts, or I love this, or I love that, there's no spiritual side to it unless you put the spiritual side into it. Now, how could I put a spiritual side to I love cherry pie? Well, the spiritual side is when your heart tells you, this emotion comes up, I got to do this or I got to do that. You think about it a minute. You say, okay, I don't need a piece of cherry pie right now because it's going to put another half a pound on my waist. And, I've just lost some weight and I like having my clothes fit the way they do. And I don't want to go out and buy new clothes. But if I can take that, those are all physical things. But then you say to yourself, I can take that yearning, that what my heart is saying to me, and I can put it in a spiritual side, like, okay, I love cherry pie. I'll have some next couple of months. I don't have to stop everything to go run out and get a piece of cherry pie. What have you done? You've conquered the emotional side, the yen side, the want side, which is the fleshly side, and put it over into a realm which is, okay, I really like it, but it's not affecting your life. Our job, everything, the spiritual world, the physical world's a great world. We live in it every day. We got TVs and we got our clothes and we got our cars and we got everything we do in the physical world is great. But everything in the physical world has a spiritual side to it. Most people never see it. They're looking at things in 2D instead of 3D. Or like we're looking at a screen right now, it's just a flat screen and we see everybody that's got their camera on. And okay, that's great. But wait a minute, there's a spiritual side to what's going on in this meeting here. We're connecting with God, Hashem. We're drawing closer to him by learning and discussing and going into his things. So we put a different side to it. It's just like watching a Hollywood movie and the story's a story, and the bad guy's the bad guy and all that. We're actually drawing spirituality in what we're doing. And we come together faithfully and learn every week. That's what Hashem wants. And I know many of you learn every day, which is even more what he wants, by reading his word, by reading maybe Rashi, or learning more about your job on this earth. Your job. If you're a violinist, don't need to be learning how to make great bread, because God made you to be a violinist. They're just, the learning that you do to do what you're doing better and in a positive manner is what God wants from you. Each one of us in our own way. I'm sitting here in this chair right now because years ago, God told me to start teaching the Christians, and I did for years. And I even got involved a little bit too involved, but he brought me back out of it and said, that's not what I meant for you to be teaching. And then through circumstances in my life, he brought me to this, which is here, go teach people that are leaving Christianity, give them some direction, give them a choice, a good choice. And that's why I'm here teaching. There's other reasons other people teach, that's up to them, but this is why we do it here. And that's why we keep everything positive. We don't talk about what not to do. We don't talk about how you were before, because it makes no difference. Because the minute you put your foot on the first step of being a righteous of the nations, and you become under Israel, an Israelite, and under God's, we call it sukkah. You're coming into his hug, his protection. We're coming up to the holiday of Sukkot, where we build the booths. The booths, when we walk into them, it's like entering into under God's wings. He's wrapping himself around us. But it has one side that is open. We have the choice. Walk in, don't walk in, stay for a while, walk out. We're given the choice. He never forces anybody to do anything. He wants us to decide as individuals. Lots of times when you're forced to do something, you resent it very much. Like God doesn't want resentment, he wants your love and your fear. Terry, I saw you looking something up. Did you have something you want to?
Well, it was something that you said that, again, it's one of those passages that I know I've probably read 100 times but never saw something. And so I was looking up in a couple of my books and looking at the commentaries on that particular verse. And I know Rashi and the sages, suggest something, but I'm looking at it from, say 3,000 years down the road. When you first read that first passage about, when Hashem called everyone to stand before him, and he gives the list. In that list, it says your water bearers and your wood choppers.
Right.
That caught me, because as I've over the past several months, as I've deepened my understanding of our connection with Israel, not just our role within our respective communities and cities and nations, but our role as being connected with Israel. I want to talk about B'nai Noah connection with Israel. And we talked about in the past about, in the past when you read certain prophecies in Isaiah, it almost can anger a person, that the nations will become your servants and your wine dressers. And I thought, well, once I began to understand the role of a righteous of the nations, that's not talking about it in the negative. Israel has their place. They have to come to a point where they have to do what they do, and we have our place. And so when Israel has to go do theirs, we'll be your vine dressers. We'll take care of, vine while you're at Shabbat or Yom Tov doing what you need to do. We can still continue on, so it's not an issue anymore. And so I've learned to see I've learned to see these prophecies in a total different light as I've learned my connection with Israel. Well, now that you read that verse, it says your water bearers and those who chop your wood. And of course, Rashi says all these Canaanites who didn't want to join Israel but still be a part of. But I'm looking at this from 3,000 years down the road. What if the water bearers and the wood choppers are us? Israel was in the process of having to not do things on Shabbos and things, and they were beginning their role, but still certain things needed to be done. And so God brings this people into the Israeli fold that can do these things while Israel is learning to do theirs. I don't know. I just saw that when you read that.
You're right. And to bring it up all these thousands of years later, when this was being talked about back then, the water drawers and the woodcutters were Gibeonites and the Canaanites.
Right.
They falsely became part of Israel. They made compromises with Israel. The Gibeonites dressed themselves up like they'd come a long distance. They were coming to be part of Israel, and they at first claimed they wanted to convert. And the Canaanites that came in said the same thing. They wanted to convert. And so Moses says, okay, you want to be here? Here's how you're going to be here. You're going to work for us, and you're going to be our slaves. Now, it's not a slave like they teach in America.
Right.
Like slavery stuff that you see in America that during the Civil War and stuff has nothing to do with biblical slavery. They were servants. And they were
on the other hand, with the Noahides, though, we kind of fill that spot, but it's a joyful way of doing what needs to be done.
No, you're absolutely right. But it was the teaching here in this is it doesn't make any difference who you were before. There's a difference by the way you come into Israel. Whether you come in by trickery, you come in because you want to be with God. So back then there was a little penance they were paying. In the end, those that came in and stayed there, I'm sure became Israelites and called righteous of the nations. But they had to go through this process, and you guys are all going through it. It's not an easy process to decide you're going to walk with the creator of the world. What happens to you? You lose friends. Some even have families turned against you. It's a painful process. It's not an easy process to do. And part of the continuing Greek and Roman type thinking, and I don't want to offend anybody, but it's this thing that we have to convince other people and reach out to other people. Everybody has to recognize it for themselves, but it's not our job to evangelize. Now, I call it in quotation evangelism because we're supposed to convince people they're supposed to see something different in you. There's a difference between you and the rest of the people. What is it that makes you different? What is it makes you a person that, you treat people kindly, you do things properly, you never get mad at people, you're not jealous of people, you're not competitive with people, it's the way you live your life in a state of, let's smile. Let's enjoy life because that's what we're here for. Let's enjoy walking with our Creator because that's what we're here for. Even if we make a mistake, we can turn to Him and say, gee, I'm really, really sorry. And I'm going to do all my power for it not to happen again. And He says, okay, keep walking. He doesn't say go down to hell for a while. He doesn't say, I'm going to give you 30 lashes and all this kind of stuff. He does everything out of love. And we have to learn to think that way. And it's tough. It is so tough. But we have to do it. It's tough for the Jews. I mean, how do you think we feel? How does a Jew think that lives in Germany today? Why is he living in Germany today? You just killed 6 million of us, half a century ago, or a little better, 70 years ago. When a terrorist kills a young person here in Israel, or a father of 3 children here in Israel, or 6 children, you don't hear at the graveside, you don't hear the relatives saying, go kill all the Arabs, go kill all the Arabs. they actually feel sorry for the person who did it. There's anger there, sure. There's sorrow there, sure. But they feel sorry for a person who could do such a thing. That whatever they're taught by whoever they're being taught it, it's just wrong. And we always believe that there's a way for people to change their ways, no matter who they are. Even a terrorist can change his ways. Even a murderer can change his ways. Now, in the fleshly world, no, but yes, even a murderer. Now, wait a minute, I didn't see that. Lee put in these terms. I debated 7 laws, in some cases 7 plus. If you don't accept the 7, you can't hang out with Israel. That's exactly right. But the 7 that we call laws or commandments are actually categories of things. They're not just on the surface, black and white, what's written there. They're categories of things. And I noticed in one of the groups, question came up, a big thing about how do we know if the food we're eating wasn't cut off an animal alive or something like that, or how do you check things? They made a big deal about this limb of a living animal. And that's okay, in black and white, that's what it says. Yes, I'm not going to cut some animal's leg off and then go roast it and eat it and let that animal limp around on 3 legs and bleed to death. But it has to do with kindness. And the kindness starts with the lowest form of life on this earth. We're the highest, animals are the lowest. It has to do, if you can treat an animal in a very cruel way, you're going to end up treating people that way because your heart becomes used to that kind of thing. You know, it always intrigued me, the thought processes behind serial murderers. And I've read a lot about it. There's whole psychologies about it, but they have one thing in common. They're the kid that grows up throwing rocks at birds and pulling the wings off of the legs off of grasshoppers. Then they start hurting small animals, cats, putting them on fire, tying cans to the tail of cats and dogs, and being cruel. Then some of them even start actually killing those small animals, and then they want to move higher. To get used to it, there's no thrill in this anymore. You got to kill something different, and then they end up killing people. So it starts off with, don't eat the limb of a living animal, which is simply being kind to people. And we can go into great depths on that. And we're going to be doing a show on, I think on this, we're going to get into this real deep about the Edom way of thinking, or not that we want to put anybody down or anything, but just the way our heads work, the way we put information together in our heads. There's a way God wants us to do it. There's a way flesh wants us to do it. And we're going to get a whole program on that. But I wanted to just take a slight deviation here for a minute. I don't think we talked about all the 7 categories, and number 7, establishing courts of law. We have them in the countries we live in. For good or for bad, we have that anyway. Eventually, you guys right now sitting here listening to me, and people you know, are going to start coming together and say, let's sit down and let's put let's codify what the Noahites need to do. Now, there's the book, the Divine Code, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay, that's carrying the Jewish outlook over to the Noahites. Well, it's a good basis for the Noahites, but the Noahites have to get together and put a book together. They have to have a prayer book put together. they have to, but it has to be decided by the Noahites under the guidance of rabbinic counseling. In other words, we want to put this in, and the rabbi looks at it and says, wait a minute, we can't find a basis for that. But all the things that are in the book, the Divine Code, don't have to end up being under the code, the laws and rules of Noahites. That not everything has to be. It doesn't have to be that strict if the righteous Gentiles don't want it to be that strict. God doesn't require it. Most of the stuff in the Divine Code is what God requires from Jews and how to make it a little more lenient, how to explain it better to those who are not Jews. And it's a good reference book. It's excellent. But it doesn't mean this is the way that has to be done. Right now, you're living your life under a guidance of Israel, which is good. But the righteous Gentiles have to put together for themselves. And that's what that's what this number 7 is all about. It's not like we don't have courts and laws. And in the law, it says there's a stop sign, you got to stop. If you don't stop, you get a ticket, you get fined, you get punished. And you can think, well, hey, if nobody's coming and I've looked, why do I have to come to a complete stop? Well, there's a reason there that you may not see. It's a reason to protect you from having a problem. So there's a strictness there that's okay, because you may look both ways and say, okay, I'm clear, and step on the gas. By the time you step on the gas, somebody comes around the corner, doesn't have a stop sign, and whammo. So it's to give you that extra second to think about things. So it's important, and what we're trying to do at B'nai Noach Connection with Israel is to gather a group of people together that can teach other people in the end how to change their way of thinking, not look at it from the Edom side of thinking, not look at it from the fleshy side, and the fleshy side is the Western side, which is Greco-Roman side of thinking. Israel's biggest enemies throughout all the years it's been overthinking. The Greeks said, hey, the Torah is great, but don't tell us there's some invisible God there. They wouldn't accept it. We're all about the body and the beauty of the body, and hey, it's good to treat people okay. There's no invisible God putting the laws down, telling us how we have to be. There's no control there. The Romans more or less were the same thing. Up until the 3rd century, when they got together with, they had the Council of Nicaea, which anybody can look up. It explains a lot of things. So even though that information is on the internet, nobody takes, I read it, but well, hey, that was 2,000 years ago or 1,700 years ago. It doesn't have anything to do with it today. Well, it certainly does, because it's controlling thoughts of 90% of the world, or 80%. And I read a very interesting article today. They found some Torah schools dating back to the 13th century in China.
Oh, wow.
There's a large Jewish community there. And over the years, they just assimilated and it's gone. But they're finding artifacts now. In other countries, it's the same thing. In Yemen, of course, we know there's been a continual Jewish presence there. In Africa and in other countries in the Middle East, they're finding the presence of the Jew there. Now, I want to say Jew instead of Israelite, because we're all Israelites. But the Jew has a role in Israel, and the righteous Gentile has a role in Israel. It's important, and I know we started off with a question about what do we do about negative teachings and people saying don't listen to this guy and don't listen to that guy and all that kind of stuff. in the way of the Gentile or the Roman Greco thinking, there are people out there. Well, I studied this and I studied that, and I'm going to tell you how it is. And they're not Israelites at all. They're Edomites. They still think like Edomites, and they don't want to allow themselves to start like Israel, start thinking like Israel. I don't want to embarrass you, Terry, but I looked for years to find someone with the intuitive insight and understanding that Terry Hayes has. The minute I read his first blog, I was on the phone to him. Because there's a key here, because he studied and wanted to convert for over 6 years and then decided, no, wait a minute, I have a choice. Do I want to be part of the Jewish side of Israel, or just want to be who I am, the way God created me, and be the righteous of the nations? And he chose righteous of the nations. But what happened in that 6.5 years is changing. His way of thinking was drastically changed. Am I right, Terry? You've learned to come out of the Greek Roman head style.
Well, it still has its.
I had to come out of it as a Jew.
It still rears its ugly head.
Of course it does. It does for me too sometimes. When I got to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go pray for an hour and ask God for forgiveness for 5 days in a row during the season of Rosh Hashanah, and every morning 5 o'clock be there at Shul, so there's a minyan, so we can do an hour's worth of prayer, standing up, pleading with God, forgiving us for all our stuff, and actually, because I'm Ashkenazi, not part of the Sephardi part of Israel. The Sephardi part do it for 40 days before Rosh Hashanah. 40 days, they get up every morning early. Ashkenazi says, yeah, it's great, we'll do it. We can fulfill it by doing it to 7 days. The Ashkenazi says the same prayers every morning. The Ashkenazi, for each of the 5 days, the beginning and end are the same, but the meat in between is different. So we feel like we're covering everything, and some great rabbis, including the Baal Shem Tov, agreed with this. So that's what we adopted. There's no difference between what they're doing and what we're doing. It's just the difference is they're part of a community that does it this way, we're part of a community that does it that way, but we're accomplishing the same thing, which is okay. We all have one thing in mind, doing what Hashem wants us to do, accomplishing, being the person that Hashem wants us to be. Before I forget, I meant to say this in the beginning, those people who are watching live and those people who watch this later, we really, really appreciate the tzedakah, the act of kindness you do by sending along a little money every now and then. It helps us pay the bills. It helps us so that we don't have to work other jobs. We can concentrate on teaching. We say we, my wife and I, and we have, of course, the Torah for the Nation Center up in the middle of it, downtown spot, which we use to talk to all the tourists coming through, and we really appreciate the help that tzedakah, everybody thinks is charity. It really isn't. It just means being kind to one another and doing what needs to be done for it. Now, there is charity. Charity is different. The guy doesn't have money to go get food. Yesterday we called a 7 blessings for a newly married couple. The week after they get married, for 6 days, somebody in the community invites them over for dinner, puts a spread on, and we do what we call 7 blessings. A cup of wine is taken, it's passed from man to man, and a different blessing is said over, which we read out of the prayer book. Then you take that and you take the original cup of wine that you said the blessing to God on, and you mix them together, and you give to the bride and groom, and they drink it together. Through that, the men of the community have blessed God and then said all the different blessings they need to have a successful marriage. and all the blessings have been said over this wine that then they both drink. Nobody else can drink it but them. Well, what happens? After we finish evening prayer, and I didn't know who the bride and groom were. I had no idea. My wife went to their wedding because she knew the bride. I wasn't, I didn't want to go. I didn't care much about going because I didn't know the groom. And we have a lot of weddings like that. Women go, if they know the women, they go. And if the men know the guy that's getting married, then usually husband and wife will then go. But the thing is, I asked Rabbi Harel, our rabbi at our shul here, I said, just announced there's going to be a Sheva Bracha, 7 blessings and it's within walking distance. Let's go. He announced it. 6 people got up that were there, me included, and him. And we walked down there, and we got there. They sat us at the table, and 3 of the people that were there in our congregation that went with us are 3 people that probably hadn't had a meal that day or had a very sparse meal. So the charity was done at the Sheva Bracha, which brought even more blessing to the bride and groom. And these guys got just a great home cooked meal that night, 6-course meal or something like that. And then they were allowed to say blessings over that cup of wine also. Homeless people that are in poverty, doesn't make any difference who you are if you're part of the community. And they benefit from the community. Now that's, by even inviting them, that shows charity and kindness, which are 2 different things. Tzedakah means doing kindness to other people. When people send us money, and it doesn't make any difference how much it is. I actually have a young man from Africa who uses PayPal to send $1.50 every month to help us out. He knows what, the old story about those that don't have that give. He knows what it is to be a righteous person. Now, everybody has charities that they give money to, and that's fine. And when we discuss tithes and so forth, we'll find out it's a 10% thing, but you'll find out common in Israel, and the Israelites, 20% of our income goes recycled back to the community. 10% in the tithe, and 10% we just give out to people in need, or somebody needs a new refrigerator. Okay, I'll buy it for you. Or a group of people, 4 or 5 people get together for a new refrigerator, new air conditioner, new stove, new oven. That doesn't even come into the tithing. It comes under, it doesn't come under just charity. It comes under being kind. Making sure people have what they need. We have something here called a gamach. It's hard to explain it other than it's kind of like goodwill. Okay, it's kind of like goodwill. People take good stuff, not used up stuff, to these places. Like they have one for women, they have one for men, they have one for furniture, they have one for heaters. So during the winter, if somebody needs one, they can come and borrow it. And people give things to it, and then those that are in need can come and either take it out on loan, or the gamach, the women here in Spot just love it, because most of it, there's all good brand name stuff in there, and everything's 5 shekel. Once it hits that shelf, it's 5 shekel. And so the women love it, especially there are people in America that send stuff that some of them buy new and send because they want to do a mitzvah, and other people just, okay, I've worn this 4 times, I'm not going to wear it anymore. And they put it, the guy's stuff is more used up than the women's stuff. But the women love it because they can go up there once or twice, once a week or once a month, and just go through and find, here's a new skirt, here's a new blouse. Wow, look at those shoes. Everything 5 shekel. That's tzedakah. That's kindness to other people. I don't need it anymore. I'm not going to throw it in the trash. Let's recycle it. Here in Israel, if we throw something out of the house, like say an old refrigerator or a stove or an oven, not too many people will come and pick it up, and there's a gemach for that, but it's a voluntary thing. It doesn't always work. So we put it out on the sidewalk next to our dumpster outside. Usually within 4 or 5 hours, it's gone. Somebody's driven by, I need that washing machine. I'm going to take it home and get it fixed. I used to have this, and this was years ago, I used to send people out and find washing machines and refrigerators and have them bring to a warehouse that I had a part of. And I would fix those things and then put them back into the community. And it's a wonderful thing to do for people. It's helping people out. There are those that work with people with addictions. That's tzedakah. That's kindness to people. It's helping people through the needs that they have. But you still have the overall obligation of the money that's coming through your hands. You say you think you worked for it. Well, okay, you did, but who's giving you the money? God gave you the place to work. He's supplying the employer with money to give to you. So there's an obligation to take part of that and send it back out to the people again. So we really appreciate when you help us. Plus, we then take the money and redistribute it also. And here, for us, there's no such thing for a charity to be like tax deductible. In other words, every penny that comes in, we pay the income tax on it, and do what has to be done, and all the rest of it goes back out on the street, other than what needs to be paid for bills or groceries or something like that. But we really, both of us, really, with heartfelt appreciation, when somebody recognizes that teachers and people that bring out of the kindness of their heart, they bring this to you. Out of your kindness, you help them survive everything else. So it's like an exchange. It used to be that you couldn't even learn Torah if you're going to use it to make a living. You weren't supposed to teach, you're not supposed to teach Torah for pay, but that changed back around the time of destruction of the temple, because the Sanhedrin made a decision. If everybody's going out around the world, we have to have teachers that learn, because they're going to go teach. During the time of the temple period, you had the Levites. They learned and learned and learned their whole lives. They went into temple service, I don't remember if it was age 20 or 30. At 50, they were out. They didn't have to do all the heavy work. They just did little stuff around the temple. But those who circulated through the temple service did it 2 weeks a year, and not 2 weeks back to back. That's how many people there were to run that Bet HaMikdash 24/7. That's how many Levites there were. So 1 week, sometime during the year they do 1 week, and another time they do another week. But what were they doing the other 52 weeks of the year? They were in villages. They were out teaching. Back then, there was the tithe to the Levites, which is an agriculture and food tithe, that kept them in everything they needed. And each village was told, you have to give so much land to the Levites to use so they can rent it out to produce food. So the whole cycle of how the teachers got paid was a completely different thing the way it is today. So anyway, that's just a little afterthought. But we really do appreciate it. And sometimes I don't always get a chance to send out a little thank you. But with from the bottoms of our heart, Sharon, I thank you for helping us in that way.
You do a lot to help us.
I appreciate that. Like I said, amounts don't make any difference. And we got a little donation page on Torah for the Nations. I put it up there. I talked about feeding the poor and this and that, hoping it would touch somebody's heart that way. But you guys that send it, not because you feel that the kindness in your heart to do this thing to help us, that's more important than anything. if somebody says, well, I'm going to give them some money because they're going to give it to the poor. And I have people that they send me money and say, well, I want to help you this is the way I want you to use it. We do that. I have a lady that sends money every month. So on Shabbat, we can supply food to people in the neighborhood that they can come to the shul. We get them to come for the morning service on Shabbat, and then they stay and they have a meal, which they may not have had otherwise. So that's very nice of her to do that. She's been doing it for years in the memory of her, in honor of her brother who's sick and going through a lot of stuff. What most people don't know, if you do it in somebody's honor or memory, you're actually giving an elevation to that person you're doing it for. The person is already going to be on the other side. It elevates them from wherever they are on the other side into a closer presence with God. And if you do it because someone's sick, and when we read the names, the blessings on the Torah after the Torah reading on on Mondays and Thursdays, after we close the Torah up, if we put it away, the rabbi says, okay, anybody need any prayers for healing? We get all the names together, and he prays over everybody. And the people that gave the names, there's a little charity box. They go and put a little coins in it or something. This is to elevate that person, to help them with their healing, or if it can be in memory of somebody. There's a prayer for in memory also. It's said if it's somebody's anniversary of their death, and you're elevating their soul. You're giving them a better presence wherever they are. Not wherever they are, we know where they are, hopefully. So you'll see in Jewish websites, in Jewish places, this is done in honor of or in memory of. People actually sponsor things about it. They'll sponsor a meal, or they'll sponsor a movie or a teaching or something like that. This is all part of tzedakah, of being righteous before God and being kind to people. So anyway, I just got that in there. I don't like to...
Scotty's got his hand raised real quick.
Oh, okay.
There I am. I really agree with the tzedakah, Pesach, and I so much appreciate you bringing that in. Can I say one thing that we do around our household on charity? I've got in my work vehicle, and we've got here in our home charity boxes that we've kindly just, a box, a tin, or a jar that we've turned into a charity box. And what we do, like when we get up in the morning, we give our morning blessing and prayer and thank God that we had a bed to sleep in. And then I make sure I had changed, and I want to remember giving into the charity box before I go any further, those that didn't have a bed to sleep in there in the night. And when I'm on the job and I eat lunch with the people I eat lunch with, I pull out the charity jar and I say, I thank God for the food that I'm eating right now. But I also, before I take my first bite, I want to remember those that don't have it. And so it surprises me how much change adds up that way in a month's time. Now, we give that to charities. But if I can call it a tithe, I think you called it a tithe, and I'm going to call it a tithe for lack of better terminology. In my mind, I feel like my tithe somewhat goes to people like you, the people that sow into me, that teach me. Am I looking at that right? Am I right there?
Absolutely. That's 10%. The tithe comes from an old word that means a tenth, which means 10% of that money that you earn is not yours. You earn it to pass on, but not necessarily to charity. A tithe is to take care of the people that are taking care of you. Charity is the other 10%. If you read the whole tithing thing, which is pretty complicated, there are years when farmers actually had to give 10% to the Levites and 20%, 10% in their village and 10% they took to Jerusalem. Not every year, but most people go through this 20% thing and they divide it up. The tithe, which was to make sure that of teachings in the operational part of Israel, and then of course the Levites and the Cohens took their tithe from that and put it back out to the people. So if you give somebody $100, they're supposed to take 10 of that 100 and put it back out on the street. So they're left with 90. Then there's another $10 out of there. That's you put in. The people come up to you with their hands out, and they yeah. And let me tell you, you guys like me get hit by every person that goes by because they know we can't say no. It's part of our philosophy. If somebody comes up and needs money, we got to put something in their hand. And it's not the amount that counts. And those charity boxes that you use are an integral part of what's going on. Why? It gets you in the habit of taking something out of your pocket and giving it to somebody else. So when it comes time somebody asks you for it, you're not going to start thinking, well, why am I going to do this? Why am I going to do that? It's going to be automatic for you to reach in your pocket and give something to somebody. They're habit builders. When I was growing up, we had one in our house, and it was a very specific one. Back then, which was a long time ago, it was for the reforestation of Israel. Excuse me 1 second. That's the alarm to get up and start getting ready to go prayer. They were little blue and white boxes for Karen Kayemet of Israel, the National Tree Fund of Israel, the National Land Fund. And you had to put something in it every single day. And you got used to reaching in your pocket, even as a kid. Your dad gives you some allowance, you earn some money. Well, here's some money that goes in the box. Now you don't put your tithe in there. What's in there is the other part of it that is getting you in the habit of, and in the end, what is it doing? You're being kind to people. That's what it is in the end. You're being kind to somebody else. Tzedakah means kindness. Doesn't mean necessarily monetary giving, but it's a combination of all of it. And when you get used to doing that and having that thought of kindness in you, then if somebody needs some physical help or somebody comes to you and, man, my car broke down, I need to go do grocery shopping, will you take me? That kindness, giving people kindness. Happened to me today that someone I know called me up and we're getting into, we're very close to the weekend. We got Shabbat, then we got 2 more days of what we call Shabbats, because you got Rosh Hashanah for 2 days, and we got like a 12-hour break in between from Saturday night until Sunday evening. So right now, it's like the only thing I can liken it to is trying to get in a mall a week before Christmas to buy presents or something. I mean, everything's jam-packed. There's no parking spaces, but people are in buying food for the festivities. And so I drove him around to 3 different stores to pick up everything else his wife needed for Friday night and for Shabbat. Friday night, and for then Sunday night is Rosh Hashanah. So he called me up, sure, because he knows, we're friends, but he knows I'll never say no, because what I'm doing is helping him, but it's also helping me. I'm doing a mitzvah. I'm doing something that God wants. I'm being kind. You can always blow somebody off. I don't have time today, or, man, I got to do this or got to do that, and gee, and you can turn it down. But those things that are put in front of you that somebody asked for, it's like God put them in front of you. That person didn't. It's a little test, a mini test. What am I going to do? But those boxes you have in your truck and you have in the house, they're get you in the habit of not even thinking. We get up in the morning, we do our morning prayers. Tzedakah box is right there by my prayer book. And next to that is a little dish with a whole bunch of change in it. So we always have change, and I pick up 3 coins and just put it in. I don't care what the denominations of the coins are. It doesn't make any difference. It's the habit of giving, reaching in your pocket.
You just answered a question I had. I was
What was
wondering, because is that, everybody has a change bucket,
Yeah.
So it's okay, like if you have a change bucket and you come in, you clean your pockets out, that you can take from that and put it in the tzedakah box.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah,
That's where it's supposed to come from.
Okay. Well, you answered my question. I wasn't sure exactly, a little process thing there.
Yeah. The tithe is something completely different. The tithe back in the day was an agricultural tithe. But if you couldn't drag all the tithe, the cultural stuff up to Jerusalem, with the years that it had to go to Jerusalem, you sold it, you took the money, you carried it up to Jerusalem, and you could either buy and give that, or you just give the money. Either one didn't make any difference. So I got a little off the subject, but we know now what these courts of law, what it means. And for right now, we use the Western Roman Greek courts of law until the time comes that the Noahides have their own Bet Din, court of law, or Sanhedrin. And what's being used through books like Divine Code and things like that, they're great, but all those decisions were made for Jews, and we can wean out what God had. There's in the 10 Commandments, which were given to the Jews. There's 613 commandments, actually. There's 10 categories. The first one is not even a commandment if you read it, so I don't know how it got the name 10 Commandments. And when you read down them, there's 5 on this side and 5 on this side. When you read down them, the first 4 are about God and Shabbat. So it's your relationship with God. The 5th one is about honor your parents, and it transitions to the other 5. They're all about people and our relationships with people. We're coming up here to Rosh Hashanah, which is, yes, relationship with God, but it also focuses on our relationship with people. If someone is angry at you about something, or you're angry or have a grudge against somebody, you're supposed to go to that person, talk it out, and get it over with right now. And you don't have to, if the person doesn't accept your apology, they don't accept it. But you don't go, I did this because of this. We don't do. Well, you did this, so I did that. I'm sorry that I did that. You don't bring up what caused you to act the way you did. I'm sorry I did this thing to you. You don't make it a discussion or a teaching. You just say that. And if the person refuses, you go to them 3 times. If they refuse, you're supposed to send 3 people to go and talk to the other person. You're not one of them. They still refuse. You've fulfilled what you have to do. Actually, after you've tried 3 times and the person refuses you, they're actually doing wrong. Because it says when someone comes to you to ask forgiveness, you're supposed to give it automatically. As soon as they ask for it. No explanations, nothing. And if you don't, then you're in the wrong all of a sudden. Because that person has come and tried to be right with you, and you're telling them you don't accept it. But you have to go back to them 3 times. Or if someone comes to you, you should accept it the first time, wipe it out of your head. Well, that person did this to me, that person said that about me, and yada, yada. It's wrong. We're not allowed to think that way. That's part of the fleshly world. That's part of the ego world. You bruised my ego, so I ain't going to forgive you. You hurt me, so I ain't going to forgive you. I'm going to try to hurt you back. You're on the wrong side of the road when you do that. So if someone comes forward to ask you for forgiveness, you have to give it to them. It's God's rules. That's for all human beings. Now, not everybody does it. Jews don't do it. Some Jews don't do it either. I've seen, hey, they rescued this Jewish guy off an island that he's been stranded on by himself for like 4 or 5 years. And when a helicopter lands, it sees 2 structures on the built there on the island. And the pastor says, what are these 2 structures? He says, oh, that one over there, that's the shul I go to and pray, and I'm there every Shabbat. He says, what's the other one? He says, that's the one I won't go in. He actually took the trouble to build the one he won't go into. That's wrong. I've seen people walk out of prayers when someone else walks in because they have something with that person. Wrong, totally wrong. It's ego. Okay. Anybody have any other questions or anything they want to bring up?
Yeah. This is Jerry. I just want to say good night because I need to leave. But thank you very much for everything that's been said. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay, for being with us. We hope we see you again.
Okay. Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
God bless you.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Yeah. I got to get me another cup of coffee in me and change clothes and get ready to go pray. And I can't tell you how much Sharon and I really, really appreciate you guys in the meeting, and you help us in a spiritual way by coming together. You guys really help us and make us stronger also, even though she's asleep at this time of the night. She's not going to get up at this time of the night. But if you haven't been yet, if you're a woman and you haven't been to Torah for the Nations Women's Gathering, I suggest you go there, sign up for it. And unfortunately, this is a holiday season right now where there's something going on almost every night for like 2 to 3 weeks. But I think Cher decided on Sunday evenings, our time here, which would be Sunday mornings in the States and Sunday afternoon down your way, Chrissy, to have this women's gathering. Strictly for women, about women. She's going to do something on the Torah, something brief on the Torah portion every week to see as a takeaway. And she's going to need a lot of input, what to talk about and all that kind of stuff, and collecting of questions. So if you point any women to that side, I think pretty much think it's something a little bit new for the righteous from the nations. It's something needed. Guys, if the women get on board, it's a done deal. You know that. All the years I used to go and speak at churches and different organizations across America and Canada, before I started speaking, I'd look out to see how many women were in the group. Because women have a much stronger spiritual connection than we do to Hashem, because they work in a higher partnership, because they create something from nothing. And they give birth to everybody. What did God do? He gave birth to Adam and Eve. And he recruited women to be his partners in that. And so they have a stronger connection to Hashem than a man does. And they have the ability to receive from him easier than a man does. And they're an important part of his plan to bring us the time of Mashiach. And he tells us, like us that are Jews, okay, you guys can go pray 3 times a day, and here's what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do. But okay, you women don't have to do exactly that, because you're so busy raising the new generation and taking care of the old, taking care of the sick, taking care of your homes. You don't have to go pay any time I say you have to be somewhere at a certain time, you don't have to be there. If you don't have time to pray when everybody else is praying, pray on your own. If a day goes by, you don't have time to do that, that's okay too. Why don't you keep me in your head? That's the partnership God has with women. With men, we're different. There's some very physical things we have to do. when we're doing the repenting now, coming and trying to cleanse ourselves and tidy ourselves up for being in God's presence on Rosh Hashanah, which was the day that Adam was created. We have to do that. The women don't have to. They can. It's okay, but they don't have to. There's very few things other, stuff like eating kosher for a Jewish woman and how they dress and things like that, or for all women being sanua, being, what's the word for it? Covering their bodies properly.
Modesty.
Modesty, there we go. They have those kind of requirements, but if it's a time-bound requirement, there's actually only one that they have to do. The lighting of the candles at Shabbat and on holidays, the lighting of candles. Other than that, I can't think of any other time-bound commitment they have to do. What do the women do by lighting the candles? And you've all seen them. They light the candles and cover their face and say the blessing and open them up. Light the candles is lighting God's Sabbath and Shekhinah shine on earth. And when you close your eyes before you do the blessings, you're cutting everything off. You're in darkness. Then you bless, and then you pull your hands away, and there's the light of Shabbat. It's changed from the light of 6 regular days to the light of Shabbat. And you're doing it not only for you and your house, but you're doing it for the men, and you're doing it for everybody. In your house, you brought the Shabbat into your home, because you're responsible for the spirituality of your home, which is a huge responsibility. And that's why God says, okay, I say you got to be at prayer at sunup. You guys don't have to do that. We tell you have to go 3 times a day and pray, and sometimes 4. Women don't have to do that. Only it's a voluntary thing with women. That's it. But still, yet they have a much stronger connection with spiritual and with God than men do. Men can fake it pretty good, but they still, we don't have the same level of spiritual connection that every single woman has. If they decide to think in that manner, actually. When I started teaching this about 15 or 20 years ago, guys would come up to me after our teaching and says, you're just playing up to the women. You think they're going to give you a lot of money or something. I said, what are you talking about? You're crazy. You have no idea what you're talking about. And people got upset the men got upset that I was explaining what the woman's role is. It's what God wants from the women. People thought I was playing games with it and everything like that. I wasn't. I'm still not today. It's just a matter of women think differently than men, and they have a stronger connection with God. And you can see it in the congregations. If you go to the Noahide groups that are on the internet, you'll see a majority of women in them. And some of the men that are in them, they come in with their Christian traditions, and they're going to take control, and they're going to do this, and they're going to do that. That's fine. Whatever they want to do, they're allowed to do it. God gives them a choice. This Noahide group for women, though, I think is a great thing. And if you know anybody you want to invite, get them involved, do it. I think the women are going to enjoy it and have a lot of fun and have a lot of great learning from it. And I hope that Sunday evening is going to be a good time. I know there's a lot of competition going on out there for Sunday evening, which is Sunday morning American time. So I don't know. I know as we finish the holiday season that Sher's going to get a hold of Angela and try to work it out, get her mind working. When they're going to start their broadcasts, which are going to start, by the way, on Facebook Messenger. They're not going to start on Zoom. So Sunday morning is tough. I have 2 that already compete with each other. Yeah, well, if you're coming from Israel, that's when other time can you do it unless you're willing to get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, see? And here we're doing this on a Wednesday night, and it's hard enough to get a group together on a Wednesday night. So, and you can either do it Sunday or you can do it when Shabbat's over with here in Israel, which moves all the time, according to the sunset. So the time for the meeting on Saturday morning would be somewhere time between 10 and 1 o'clock. And what are most people doing on Saturday? They're either working or they're grocery shopping, I think. So Sundays are the best day, and the teachers know that. They don't want to get up 3 o'clock in the morning and teach, so they set it up for that time. Anyway, yeah, it's